Welcome back to War Thunder and welcome aboard the M26E1, the American Premium 6.7 Tier 4 medium tank. And the question is, what is this video about? Well, it's kind of a showcase, kind of a first impressions, and kind of a way to talk about the capabilities of this tank and the desperate try to put it into perspective, because this is an odd fish. It plays by the rules, gets punished for it, but has other advantages going for it that other tanks get even more punished for. And if that sounds odd, well, let me talk you through. The M26E1 was always this tank that I never purchased because I had other fantastic vehicles already purchased for the grinding. First of all, there is the superbly performing Super Hellcat that I still highly recommend. Then there is the still recent addition in comparison, the T29, which is a fantastic, very strong heavy tank that kind of is a little bit too strong for my taste at 6.7, having driven it myself. And on the Super Hellcat and the T29 I made already a tank review, so you might look it up and make yourself a picture of it. Then there are two other tanks that I want to talk about in this comparison, and that is the normal M26, the Pershing, and then the M20 and then the T26E1, the Super Pershing. The M26 is an American 6.3 Tech Tree medium tank, and it's equipped with a 90mm M3 cannon, which is the same as on the Super Hellcat. And you practically do the same, but a little bit slower, with having a little bit more armor. In this respect, I still think that the Super Hellcat is for my playstyle in both arcade and realistic the better tank, but let's talk about some arcade stats. Now it's getting important. Yeah, despite you seeing here some background footage in realistic, by the way, this is the very first battle that I played overall, and yes, this is a stupid thing to chase a T-44 122. Let's have a look how it turns out. Back to the M26. I have an over 6-to-1 kill to death ratio in arcade. You don't get this with a bad tank, and that was... I don't know how I survived the shot. I should be dead, but yeah, it's nice to get away with it alive. And you kind of saw the effect. I shot a Russian tank in the side and one-shotted it. And I'm using nothing but the APHE shell, despite having some other shell types loaded. And I tried to flank the enemy. And you can see this tank is kind of a little bit slow. But back to the M26. The M26 is a fantastic tank in my hands because I think I figured out how to play it. Flank it, play it like a T-34-85, and you have fantastic games even in arcade. In realistic, I still have to play it because, you know, there are so many tanks that I have to play and so on. And then there is the Super Pershing. The Super Pershing was a tank that I did not like, but it has still a 4-to-1 kill to death ratio in arcade, if I remember correctly, and in realistics it's also an okayish tank. It's not really bad. It has a long 90mm gun, and then we finally can begin to compare those tanks because they have basically the same chassis, the same turret, and the same caliber of the gun, but then it begins to deviate. The M26 has the best horsepower to ton ratio out of them all. The T26E1 the worst, with just around about 10. The M26E1 stands in between. Then it comes where the medium bias within War Thunder kicks in, the medium tank bias that is. Overall, throughout all the nations, they have advantages over the heavy tanks. And that is, in this case, you have on the M26E1 a T54 cannon that has a caliber of 90mm, 41 rounds at your disposal. You have a reload rate for an expert crew of 11.8 seconds. That's rather long. Let's compare it to the M26, 9.6 seconds. So you have roughly 1.5 seconds longer reload than the short 90mm. That's kind of understandable and okayish. Okay? Then you come to the T26E1, and that tank then suddenly has 13.2 seconds of reload. That is insane. That is, again, like 1.5 seconds longer than the M26E1. But you kind of have the same exact performing gun on practically all other stats. You have practically the same turret rotation speed, you have the same gun depression, same gun elevation speed, which is by the way not good and a downside on this tank. But you just have the same shells, you still have the same penetration values and the same damaging effect, but a 1.5 second longer reload, just because the T26E1 is a heavy tank and the M26E1 is a medium tank. You know, and at this point I just can't justify the stats. It is medium tank bias. But don't worry, this tank has also its massive downsides. Practically, this gun is a heavy tank gun. For example, when we compare it to the same battle rating heavy tank, the King Tiger, it completely gets outperformed. Faster reload on the 88, higher penetration on the 88, just the damaging effect is not as great. But kind of there begins the real impact of the high explosive filling. The long 88 often needs a second shot to put down an enemy, whereas with the 90mm you have enough high explosive filling to more or less reliable one-shot enemies. Let's have a look at this penetration and we come to the second downside that seems to be an advantage. I get penetrated to the turret front and all 5 crew members get knocked out. So let's have a look at the results, and meanwhile I talk you through this second advantage that is not a real advantage. I never survived a penetration shot. Whenever I got penetrated I died, at least by high explosive shells. It could have been a German shell or a Russian shell, it didn't matter. The thing is, you have 5 crew members of which 2 sit in the front of the vehicle, alright? But that means that you should have a survivability of like a Panther or a Tiger, which can survive a turret penetration most of the time. They suffer heavily from it, but they are still in the game. This one doesn't. The crew always dies. It seems the chassis is a little bit shorter and the shrapnel way from the place of explosion still has enough angle to go through the shaped hull to go down to the crew members and kill them as well. And that is kind of a shame, because this tank could have been the hidden gem, but the survivability is just not there. I did not really count on this, but it would have been nice, you know, to survive a shell even now and then. Then we come to the ammunition. You have 5 shots in the turret, the rest is at the bottom of the tank, which is nice. However, you kind of have nothing from it. You remove 4 shells because 1 is already being registered as being in the breach, so all the turret ammunition is out of the tank, and then you still have a lot of rounds in your tank. Must be like 37, and that is plenty of ammunition, because you also rely on mostly on the APHE shell type, and that is just fine. You have enough ammunition, and to take out more doesn't give you any benefit or survivability in this respect. So 37 rounds and you can go into battle. Take a few APCR rounds if you are a bit more advanced player than I am, because I see no real use of APCR. Oh, you can penetrate the front of a Yak Tiger with it. Yeah, but you have to stand in front of a Yak Tiger to do so, and mostly you don't come off that alive to tell the tale, you know. Now, you practically have heavy tank gun handling, but you don't have the good performance of a real heavy tank gun. And you shouldn't take on enemies from the front in the first place. So a medium tank like the short 90mm would kind of be better and beneficial, because, you know, you should take on enemies from the side in the first place. Then there is the reload, and the reload gets you into some trouble. Now, I told you that for my expert crew I have a reload of 11.8 seconds, and that is kind of the region, if you have not an expert crew in particular and the enemy team has a really good crew, maybe even an ace crew, that they can replace crew members faster, that you can reload, shoot back and potentially kill you. And this is always a very, very tricky situation when you are in a medium tank. Certain medium tanks do not really have this problem. For example, the Russian T-44-122 or all the Russian tanks with 100mm guns, they just kill with one shot or disable the enemy so hard that they have to repair before they even can reliably shoot back in this respect, in the overwhelming majority of cases. With the 90mm, you just do not have that much damage output, despite having kind of more high explosive filling, and that depends again in the filling of the shrapnels. And the shrapnels on a 100mm shell are just simply bigger than on a 90mm. And in this respect, the Panther II with the fast reload is just outstandingly better. That's just simply the truth. Together with better mobility and to a lot degree better, more reliable armor and survivability, you just see why it has a higher battle rating. In this case, I had the only incident that you just saw where the long 90mm gave me potentially an advantage over the short 90mm. I disabled the Panther at first, and then I saw that the gun breech was damaged and he kept turning, so he did not repair. And maybe he couldn't, maybe he was stuck, I don't know. Then the King Tiger saw me, tried to turn, and I shot his side. And I'm not sure if at this angle I could have reliably penetrated with the short 90mm. It still might have been possible, but you get the point. Yeah, there might be the argument that I could have reloaded significantly faster, by 1.5 seconds, which is an eternity in this kind of scenarios, that prevented the Tiger II from turning in the first place. And I could have potentially gotten into a better position because of the better horsepower to ton ratio if I compare it to the T26. That's all true. So in this respect, it's always really hard to reliably argue, alright? And if you have just simply two guns with exactly the same stats and you compare them, and one has one factor that makes it so much better, for example, just as an example, half the reload, it's very easy to argue, right? And then you have this tank, and it's kind of a little bit better than the normal Pershing, the M26, but it has a higher battle rating. Does this gun give you really an advantage? The gun handling is more of a heavy tank gun. The gun elevation speed is not the highest, to be honest. Yeah, you have 10 degrees of gun depression, 15 degrees of gun elevation. One advantage that I have to point out is that you have two 50 cals. So one on the top for the commander, which is kind of the theme for American tanks. But then also the coaxial machine gun is a 50 cal, and that is great. Because very often the 7.62mm machine gun just doesn't cut it. For example, if you have a AAA vehicle that is about to flank you, a potato truck for example, you know, those Russian AAA tanks that you see since the hull brake mechanic was introduced less and less at higher tiers. Before that they were kind of trollish. Now then let's talk about the gun elevation speed. It's 4 degrees for an ace crew, alright? And that is not really great. If you think about the Jagdtiger for example, that has 3 degrees of gun elevation speed, you know, or vertical gun speed. That is just not really great. We're talking here about a 90mm that is 1 degree per second faster on the vertical than the massive German 128mm. So you kind of get the slugginess of the gun handling. What you just saw here were 2 aces in quick succession, and I think it shows the capabilities of the tank. It is great that it has a 90mm. It is a good side that you have more penetration than on the M3 90mm, but you pay a lot for it. Less gun handling, or less good gun handling, less rate of fire, and practically the same damaging effect. This is not a 105mm gun that would justify the longer reload. It's just a 90mm, and again, it's one-staged ammunition. On other hands, you are better off in terms of mobility and rate of fire than the Superpershing, what tells us a lot about the Superpershing, you know. In this respect, I cannot really say that this tank is really worth it. But this is not a tank review. This is not my final verdict. Those were just my first impressions, and they are kind of mixed. The tank is not outstandingly awesome or overpowered. In this respect, it kind of could be a really great, you know, premium tank, and it is that. It is not a problematic tank. It brings a little bit fresh wind into the battle, and the rewards are decent. Nearly 50,000 silver lions for 5 kills and 5,579 research points. Without the modifier, 10% research point booster applied, securing me second place with 1,216 score points. So that's it for me today. I hope you enjoyed the video. Give it a like if you did. Subscribe if you want to see more. Let me know in the comment section what you think about this tank, if you have played it yourself or you play it a lot of times against it. And we will see each other on the battlefields of War Thunder.